The stars looked cold and distant as Commander Zexthul stood on the bridge of his warship. His black eyes scanned the void of space through the massive viewing window. Behind him, the crew worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. The bridge hummed with the low sound of engines and computers. Zexthul's chitinous armor gleamed under the blue lights of the command center. The Vorthak had ruled this part of space for 300 years. They were proud warriors with hard shells covering their bodies and sharp claws that could tear through metal. Their society was built on one simple idea: the strong ruled the weak. Every species they met either became their slaves or died fighting them. There was no middle ground. Zexthul had spent his entire life preparing for moments like this. He had risen through the ranks by being ruthless and smart. His ship, the Death's Edge, was one of the finest vessels in the Vorthak fleet. Its weapons could reduce a planet to ash. Its shields could stop almost any attack. The crew feared and respected him in equal measure. Today brought news that made Zexthul's mandibles click with excitement. A human cargo ship was traveling through Vorthak space without permission. The vessel was called the UES Dakota, and it appeared to be carrying valuable minerals from some distant mining colony. Humans were a new species that the Vorthak had, only recently discovered. Intelligence reports said they were weak creatures with soft skin and no natural weapons. They seemed perfect for slavery. The Dakota was traveling alone through the Kepler 442 system. It moved slowly like most cargo ships, heavy with its load of precious metals. The ship looked old and worn, with patches of different colored metal showing where repairs had been made. Its engines left a faint trail of ionized particles that Zexthul's sensors could track easily. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the command chair of the Dakota. He was a tall man with graying hair and calm blue eyes. His face showed the lines that came from years of deep space travel. He wore a simple blue uniform that looked like standard merchant marine clothing. Nothing about him suggested he was anything more than a cargo hauler trying to make a living in the dangerous frontier. Morrison watched the scanner displays with careful attention. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Barnes, stood beside his chair. She was younger than Morrison, with short brown hair and alert green eyes. Her military bearing was carefully hidden beneath civilian clothes. To any outside observer, she looked like a typical merchant officer. At the engineering station, Pete Collins monitored the ship's power systems. He was a stocky man with calloused hands and oil stains on his coveralls. His easy smile and friendly manner made him seem like every cargo ship engineer in the galaxy, but his eyes held a sharpness that spoke of deeper knowledge. Amy Rodriguez handled navigation from her station near the front of the bridge. She was small and quick, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her fingers danced over the controls with expert precision. Danny Wright managed communications from his post, a lanky young man who seemed more interested in his equipment than anything happening around him. The Dakota's cargo holds were full of rare earth minerals, worth millions of credits on Earth. At least that was what the ship's manifest claimed. The reality was quite different. Hidden behind false walls and disguised as mining equipment, the Dakota carried some of the most advanced military technology humanity had ever created. Earth's leaders had known this moment would come eventually. When humans first ventured into deep space, they found evidence of other intelligent species. Most of the signs pointed to civilizations that were aggressive and territorial. The Earth Defense Corps had spent decades preparing for first contact with hostile aliens. The Q-ship program was born from this preparation. Earth built vessels that looked like ordinary cargo haulers or passenger liners. From the outside, they appeared vulnerable and helpless. Inside, they carried weapons and defensive systems that could rival any military vessel. The Dakota was the first of these ships to encounter alien forces. Morrison had commanded the Dakota for 2 years. His crew had trained endlessly for this moment. They practiced their responses until they could switch from peaceful merchants to deadly warriors in seconds. Every system on the ship had been tested and retested. Every crew member knew their role perfectly. The Vorthak fleet consisted of 5 destroyers, each one larger and more heavily armed than the Dakota appeared to be. Zexthul commanded the operation from his flagship. The other ships spread out in a hunting formation designed to trap their prey. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never faced serious resistance. Sub-Commander Grixtal served as Zexthul's tactical officer. He was younger than his commander, eager to prove himself in battle. His shell was still unmarked by the scars that came with age and experience. He studied the human ship with hungry eyes, already imagining the glory that capturing it would bring. The Vorthak had perfected their tactics over centuries of conquest. They would approach their target while staying hidden behind asteroids and debris fields. Once in position, they would demand surrender. Most species gave up immediately when faced with overwhelming force. Those that resisted rarely lasted long. Against Vorthak weapons, Zexthul's plan was simple and proven. His ships would surround the Dakota and disable its engines with precise shots. Then they would board the vessel and claim both cargo and crew. The humans would become valuable slaves, and the minerals would fund more ships for the Vorthak fleet. It was exactly the kind of easy victory that brought promotions and honor. Morrison knew the aliens were coming long before they revealed themselves. The Dakota's sensors were far more advanced than they appeared. Hidden arrays could detect ship movements across vast distances. Computer systems analyzed every particle emission and gravitational disturbance. By the time Zexthul thought he was beginning his hunt, Morrison already knew exactly where each Vorthak ship was located. Barnes studied the tactical display with professional interest. The alien formation was textbook perfect for dealing with helpless merchants. It would be completely wrong for fighting a real warship. She smiled slightly as she watched the enemy vessels move into position. They were making this almost too easy. Collins checked his engineering readouts one more time. The ship's fusion reactors were running at normal levels, giving no sign of their true potential. The weapons systems showed as offline on any external scan. Even the ship's armor appeared to be nothing more than standard hull plating. Everything was exactly as it should be. Rodriguez plotted escape routes and attack vectors with calm precision. Her navigation computer held detailed maps of the asteroid field around them. She knew every hiding spot and clear corridor. When the time came to move, the Dakota would dance through space like a fighter instead of lumber like a freighter. Wright monitored enemy communications with growing amusement. The Vorthak were discussing their plans openly, confident that no one could understand their language. They had no idea that human computers had been breaking alien codes for months. Every word they spoke was being recorded and analyzed. The trap was almost complete. Zexthul's ships had surrounded the Dakota in what they thought was perfect formation. The human vessel continued on its course, apparently unaware of the danger closing in from all sides. The Vorthak commander felt the familiar thrill of an easy hunt reaching its conclusion. Morrison looked around his bridge one last time. His crew was ready. His ship was ready. Humanity was about to announce its presence to the galaxy in a way that would never be forgotten. He settled back in his command chair and waited for the aliens to make their move. Soon, the Vorthak would learn why attacking a human vessel was the biggest mistake they could ever make. The asteroid field around them cast long shadows in the dim light of the distant star. Chunks of rock and metal drifted silently through space, some as small as pebbles, others as large as buildings. Commander Zexthul had chosen this location, carefully. The asteroids would hide his ships until the moment of attack and prevent the human vessel from escaping. Zexthul's mandibles clicked with satisfaction as his fleet moved into final position. His 5 destroyers surrounded the Dakota like predators circling wounded prey. The human ship continued its steady course, apparently oblivious to the danger closing in from all sides. Soon these soft creatures would learn the price of trespassing. In Vorthak space, the commander activated his communication system and prepared to address the human vessel. This was always his favorite part of any hunt. The moment when inferior beings realized they were completely helpless. The fear in their voices when they begged for mercy they would never receive. It filled him with the same pride his ancestors had felt when they conquered their first alien world. Captain Morrison sat calmly in his command chair as the alien transmission came through. The bridge speakers crackled with harsh, clicking sounds that the ship's computer quickly translated into human speech. Morrison listened without expression as Zexthul delivered his ultimatum. The Vorthak commander demanded immediate surrender and threatened total destruction if the humans resisted. Barnes stood beside Morrison's chair, her hand resting casually on the tactical console. To any observer, she looked nervous and uncertain. In reality, she was fighting to keep from smiling. The aliens had positioned themselves exactly where human battle computers had predicted they would. Every Vorthak ship was now perfectly targeted by hidden weapon systems. Morrison activated his own communication system and replied to the alien commander. His voice was steady and calm as he made a counteroffer. The Vorthak had 30 seconds to withdraw from the area or face the consequences. He spoke like a man discussing the weather, showing no fear or excitement. Zexthul heard the human response with complete disbelief. This weak creature was actually threatening him. A soft-skinned biped with no natural weapons was challenging the might of the Vorthak collective. The sheer audacity of it was almost amusing. Almost. Sub-Commander Grixtal laughed out loud at the human's words. The sound was like breaking glass mixed with grinding metal. Other crew members joined in until the bridge echoed with Vorthak amusement. These humans were even more foolish than their intelligence reports had suggested. They actually believed they could fight against superior Vorthak technology. Morrison began counting down the seconds in his head. 30, 29, 28. He had given the aliens a fair warning, which was more than they would have given any human ship. Now they would learn why Earth had spent so much time and money preparing for this moment. Zexthul decided that the humans needed a practical demonstration of Vorthak power. He ordered his gunners to target the Dakota's engine section with low-power plasma bursts. This would disable the ship without destroying it completely. Then his warriors could board the vessel and teach these arrogant creatures some respect. The first plasma bolts lanced out from the Vorthak destroyers, bright green streams of superheated gas that could melt through standard ship armor like it was paper. Zexthul expected to see the human vessel's engines explode in brilliant fireballs. Instead, he watched in growing confusion as the shots were absorbed by some kind of energy barrier he had never seen before. Morrison felt the ship shake slightly as the alien weapons struck their shields. The defensive systems had absorbed the attack without any trouble at all. He looked at Barnes and nodded slightly. It was time to show these aliens what humans were really capable of. The Dakota began to change before the astonished eyes of the Vorthak fleet. Panels slid back along the hull to reveal weapon ports that had been completely hidden moments before. Fake cargo containers ejected from the ship's belly, exposing additional defensive systems and sensor arrays. The vessel's engines suddenly blazed with new power as their true capabilities came online. Barnes activated the weapon systems with smooth efficiency, targeting computers that had been tracking the alien ships for hours now had perfect firing solutions. Railgun turrets swiveled to face their targets while missile launchers loaded their deadly cargo. The Dakota transformed from helpless merchant to deadly predator in less than 10 seconds. Collins pushed the ship's power systems to full military settings. Fusion reactors that had been running at barely 20% capacity suddenly roared to life. Energy coursed through conduits that had been carefully disguised as ordinary ship systems. The Dakota's true nature was finally revealed in all its terrible glory. Rodriguez began evasive maneuvers that would have been impossible for a real cargo ship. The Dakota spun and rolled through space with the grace of a fighter craft. Gravitational manipulation drives allowed the ship to perform turns that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The Vorthak gunners found their careful aim completely useless. Wright jammed the alien communication systems with sophisticated electronic warfare programs. Vorthak ships suddenly found themselves isolated from each other, unable to coordinate their attacks. Their formation began to fall apart as individual commanders struggled to understand what was happening to their supposedly helpless prey. Zexthul watched his perfect ambush collapse in seconds. The human ship was moving like nothing he had ever seen before. Its weapons were tearing through his shields as if they were made of tissue paper. 2 of his destroyers had already taken critical damage from the first exchange of fire. The Dakotas. Railguns fired with devastating accuracy. Solid projectiles accelerated to nearly light speed, punched through Vorthak armor, and exploded deep inside enemy ships. Each shot was perfectly aimed at critical systems. Engines died. Weapons went offline. Life support systems failed. The first Vorthak destroyer to die was the Bone Crusher, commanded by an officer named Thexkol. He had served in the collective fleet for 40 years and had never seen anything like the human weapons. The railgun slug that killed his ship passed completely through the hull and detonated the main reactor. The destroyer vanished in a brief, brilliant star. Sub-Commander Grixtal stared in horror as another of their ships died. The humans were using weapons that seemed to ignore Vorthak defensive systems. Their targeting was impossibly accurate. Their rate of fire was beyond anything the collective had ever encountered. How could such primitive creatures possess such advanced technology? Morrison watched the battle unfold with professional satisfaction. Years of training and preparation were paying off exactly as planned. The Dakota's crew worked with practiced efficiency, each person knowing their role perfectly. This was what Earth's defenders had been built for. Barnes coordinated the tactical response with cold precision. She allocated targets and managed the ship's defensive systems while monitoring damage reports from the enemy fleet. The Vorthak ships were falling apart under sustained fire from weapons they had never imagined possible. The second Vorthak destroyer to die was called the Star Render. Its captain tried to ram the Dakota in a desperate last attack. Rodriguez simply adjusted the ship's gravitational field and watched the enemy vessel slide harmlessly past while railgun fire tore it apart. The wreckage tumbled away into the asteroid field. Zexthul realized that his entire fleet was doomed unless he acted immediately. He ordered his remaining ships to concentrate all their fire on the human vessel. If they could overwhelm its defenses, through sheer volume of shots, they might still salvage something from this disaster. The combined firepower of 3 Vorthak destroyers hammered against the Dakota's shields. Plasma bolts and particle beams created a light show that lit up the entire asteroid field. For a moment, it seemed like the alien weapons might break through the human defenses. Collins rerouted power from non-essential systems to boost the shield generators. The protective barrier held firm against the alien assault. The Dakota continued its deadly dance through space, dodging and weaving while its weapons carved the enemy fleet into scrap metal. Wright detected massive power buildups in the surviving Vorthak ships. The aliens were preparing to fire their main guns in one final desperate attack. He relayed the information to Barnes, who smiled grimly and prepared the Dakota's response. Morrison gave the order for maximum firepower. Every weapon on the ship fired simultaneously in a devastating barrage that lit up space like a small sun. The surviving Vorthak destroyers simply ceased to exist under the concentrated assault. Only Zexthul's flagship remained. The commander of the Vorthak fleet found himself alone and helpless. His shields were down, his weapons were offline, his engines were dead. The human ship approached slowly, like a predator savoring its victory. Zexthul knew his death was moments away. Morrison could have destroyed the last enemy ship easily. Instead, he chose to send a message. The Dakota's railguns fired one final time, not at the Vorthak ship, but at the largest asteroid nearby. The massive rock exploded in a shower of fragments that rained down on the disabled destroyer. Zexthul understood the message perfectly. The humans could have killed him instantly, but chose to let him live. They wanted him to know that his survival was their choice, not his achievement. Sub-Commander Grixtal had never known such fear in his entire life. He sat in the damaged command chair of his crippled destroyer, staring at the tactical display that showed the wreckage of his fleet. 4 Vorthak warships had been reduced to expanding clouds of superheated gas and twisted metal. Only his vessel remained intact, and that was purely because the humans had chosen to spare him. The human ship hung motionless in space nearby, its weapons still trained on his defenseless vessel. Grixtal could see the hidden gun ports that had emerged from what looked like harmless cargo sections. The deception was complete and terrifying. How many other human ships were actually disguised warships waiting to destroy unwary Vorthak fleets? Grixtal's engineering officer reported that life support would fail within hours. The main reactor was offline and auxiliary power was nearly exhausted. If he wanted to survive long enough to warn the collective about this new threat, he needed to leave immediately. His ship's emergency systems could keep him alive during the journey home, but just barely. The young sub-commander activated his ship's damaged communication system and sent a final message to the human vessel. He offered formal surrender according to Vorthak military law and requested permission to depart. The response came quickly in perfect Vorthak language, which was somehow even more unsettling than the military defeat. Captain Morrison granted the alien permission to leave, but with conditions. The surviving Vorthak ship would carry a message back to their leaders. Any future attacks on human vessels would result in immediate retaliation against Vorthak territory. Humanity was no longer hiding its capabilities and would respond to aggression with overwhelming force. Grixtal's damaged destroyer limped away from the battlefield, leaving behind the debris of what had been the pride of the local Vorthak fleet. The journey back to collective space took 3 days through hyperspace routes that pushed his failing engines to their absolute limits. Every hour brought new system failures and growing certainty that he might not survive to deliver his warning. Meanwhile, the UES Dakota continued on its original course as if nothing had happened. Morrison and his crew resumed their cover identities as simple cargo haulers. The ship's weapons disappeared back into their hidden compartments. The advanced sensor arrays retracted behind false panels. Within an hour, the vessel looked exactly like an ordinary merchant ship again. Barnes compiled a detailed report of the engagement for transmission to Earth Command. The battle recordings would be analyzed by thousands of military experts and scientists. Every aspect of Vorthak technology and tactics would be studied to prepare for future encounters. The age of human isolation was officially over. Collins began damage assessment and repair procedures. The Dakota had taken some hits during the battle, though nothing that seriously threatened the ship's capabilities. The Vorthak weapons were powerful but primitive compared to human defensive technology. Still, every lesson learned now might save lives in future conflicts. Rodriguez plotted a new course that would take them through several more star systems before reaching Earth. If other alien species were monitoring human ship movements, they would see nothing unusual about the Dakota's travel patterns. The ship needed to maintain its cover for as long as possible. Wright transmitted coded messages to hidden communication relays throughout human space. Within hours, every major military installation would know about the first contact with hostile aliens. Earth's defensive preparations would shift into high gear as humanity prepared for the war that seemed inevitable. Grixtal's ship finally reached Vorthak space after a harrowing journey that nearly killed him twice. Emergency life support had failed completely during the last 6 hours, forcing him to wear a combat suit that recycled his air and water. His crew of 12 had been reduced to 7 survivors, the rest having died from radiation exposure or system failures. The collective's border stations were shocked to see a lone destroyer approaching without escort or explanation. Grixtal's ship was supposed to be part of a 5-vessel hunting pack led by Commander Zex Thul. Where were the other ships, and why was this one so badly damaged? High Admiral Kethmore received Grixtal's initial report with growing disbelief and anger. The sub-commander claimed that a single human cargo ship had destroyed 4 Vorthak destroyers using advanced weapons that appeared from nowhere. Such a story was obviously the desperate lie of a coward trying to avoid execution for abandoning his duties. Grixtal was brought before a military tribunal on the collective homeworld of Vorthak Prime. The massive planet was covered with industrial cities and military installations that had been built over centuries of conquest. The tribunal chamber was a vast hall decorated with the banners of defeated alien races and trophies, taken from 100 different worlds. The young officer stood before 5 high admirals and told his story exactly as it had happened. He described the human ship's transformation from helpless freighter to deadly warship. He explained how their weapons had cut through Vorthak shields like they were made of paper. He detailed the speed and precision of the human counterattack. High Admiral Kethmore listened to the account with visible contempt. He had served in the collective military for over 60 years and had conquered dozens of alien worlds. Never in all that time had he encountered a species that could match Vorthak military technology. The idea that soft-skinned humans could pose any real threat was absurd. The tribunal's verdict was swift and brutal. Grixtal was found guilty of cowardice in the face of the enemy, and dereliction of duty. His claims about human capabilities were dismissed as fabrications designed to cover his own failures. The sentence was death by disintegration, to be carried out immediately as an example to other officers. Grixtal died screaming warnings about the human threat that no one would believe. His execution was broadcast throughout the collective military, as a reminder of what happened to officers who abandoned their posts. With his death, the only eyewitness account of human military capabilities was silenced forever. High Admiral Kethamore decided that the humans needed to be taught a lesson about the consequences of attacking Vorthak forces. He would assemble a massive, punitive expedition that would reduce human space to burning rubble. The weak creatures would learn to fear the collective's wrath and serve as an example to other potential rebels. Back on Earth, Admiral Catherine Stone reviewed the Dakota's battle recordings in her underground command center beneath the Rocky Mountains. The facility had been built during humanity's early expansion into space, designed to coordinate defensive operations across multiple star systems. Today, it would become the nerve center for humanity's first interstellar war. Dr. Henry Chen examined the alien technology and biological samples that the Dakota had collected from the destroyed Vorthak ships. His laboratory was filled with strange artifacts and computer models of alien physiology. What he found was deeply disturbing and confirmed humanity's worst fears about their new neighbors. The Vorthak were not just aggressive by choice, they were biologically programmed for conquest and domination. Their social structure was based entirely on hierarchy maintained through violence. They viewed other species as either useful slaves or obstacles to be eliminated. There could be no peaceful coexistence with such beings. Chen's report recommended immediate preparation for total war. The Vorthak would never accept human independence and would keep attacking until one species or the other was completely destroyed. Humanity had won the first battle through surprise and superior technology, but the aliens would adapt and return in greater numbers. Admiral Stone activated Earth's hidden defense networks and recalled all Q ships to prepared positions. Orbital weapon platforms came online after decades of disguised construction. Military vessels emerged from civilian disguises throughout human space. The time for hiding was over. Morrison received new orders that elevated the Dakota from a single reconnaissance mission to the flagship of humanity's first deep space battle group. His crew would be expanded and his ship refitted with even more advanced weapons systems. The war they had started would require every advantage humanity could deploy. Barnes was promoted to captain and given command of her own vessel, the UES, Oregon. Her experience in the first battle made her invaluable for training other crews in anti-Vorthak tactics. The lessons learned from that engagement would save countless human lives in the conflicts to come. The collective high command began, assembling their punitive force without any real understanding of what they faced. Intelligence reports dismissed humans as primitive creatures with limited technology and no military experience. The fleet being prepared would be more than adequate to crush any resistance and claim human space for the collective. High Admiral Kethamore selected 50 of his finest warships for the expedition. The force represented nearly a quarter of the entire Vorthak military and included some of their most advanced vessels. He viewed this as massive overkill for dealing with a species that had barely mastered space travel. Unknown to the Vorthak, their communications had been compromised from the moment they first encountered human forces. Earth's intelligence services were monitoring every aspect of the alien military buildup. High Admiral Kethamore stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Absolute Domination, and surveyed the greatest fleet the Vorthak Collective had assembled in 50 years. 50 warships hung in formation around his massive dreadnought, their hulls bristling with enough firepower to reduce a dozen worlds to ash. This was overwhelming force by any reasonable standard, far more than needed to crush a primitive species that had barely left their home system. The High Admiral was a veteran of countless campaigns who had personally overseen the conquest of 17 different alien civilizations. His chitinous armor bore the scars of 100 battles, and his reputation for ruthless efficiency was known throughout collective space. When he spoke, lesser officers trembled and entire star systems prepared for war. Kethmore had chosen his fleet commanders carefully for this mission. Each ship was crewed by experienced warriors who had proven themselves in battle against various alien species. Their tactics had been perfected over centuries of conquest, their weapons tested against every known form of defensive technology. The humans would face the full might of the most successful military force in the galaxy. The fleet entered hyperspace with ceremonial precision. Their destination, the human home system that intelligence reports called Sol. Kethmore expected to find a few primitive orbital installations and perhaps some basic defensive satellites. The humans would surrender quickly once they realized the hopelessness of their situation, or they would die with their pathetic resistance crushed beneath Vorthak's superiority. What the High Admiral did not know was that human intelligence had been monitoring Vorthak communications since their first encounter. Earth's defensive planners knew exactly when the invasion fleet would arrive and precisely what forces it contained. Admiral Catherine Stone had spent weeks positioning her own ships and preparing the most elaborate trap in military history. The Sol defense grid was humanity's greatest secret and most powerful weapon. For decades, Earth had been building hidden, orbital fortresses disguised as civilian space stations and mining platforms. Weapon satellites masqueraded as communication relays and scientific instruments. Even cargo ships and passenger liners concealed military capabilities that would shock any alien observer. Admiral Stone commanded the defense from her flagship, the UES Constitution, a massive vessel that appeared to be nothing more than a civilian space dock orbiting Earth. In reality, it was a fortress mounting more firepower than most alien battle fleets. Its crew of 3,000 included some of the finest military minds humanity had ever produced. Captain Morrison had been recalled from his mission and given command of a full Q-ship squadron. The Dakota now led 12 vessels that looked like ordinary merchant ships, but carried enough weapons to engage capital ships on equal terms. His experience from the first battle made him invaluable for coordinating humanity's unconventional tactics. Captain Barnes commanded her own squadron of disguised warships positioned near the outer planets. The UES Oregon and its sister ships waited in the shadow of Neptune, ready to strike at the alien fleet's flanks once the battle began. Her crew had trained extensively in the new combat techniques developed from the Dakota's encounter. The Vorthak invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace, at the edge of the Sol system, exactly where human intelligence had predicted they would appear. Kethmore's sensors immediately began cataloging what appeared to be a typical primitive civilization: orbital installations around the inner planets, numerous civilian ships moving between worlds, and minimal obvious military presence. The High Admiral was slightly disappointed by how easy this conquest would be. Human space showed none of the massive defensive installations or patrol fleets that more advanced civilizations usually deployed. These creatures seemed to have no understanding of proper military doctrine or the realities of interstellar warfare. Kethmore opened communications with the largest human orbital station, which his computers identified as some kind of industrial facility. He delivered the standard collective ultimatum: immediate unconditional surrender or total destruction. He expected the usual terrified response and quick capitulation that marked most first contacts with inferior species. Admiral Stone received the alien communication in her command center deep within the Constitution's armored hull. Around her, hundreds of officers and technicians monitored displays showing every ship and weapon platform in the solar system. The trap was set, and the enemy had walked directly into it. Stone's response to the Vorthak ultimatum was calm and professional. She thanked High Admiral Kethmore for his message and politely declined his offer of surrender. Instead, she provided him with coordinates for the nearest interstellar border and suggested he depart immediately. Her tone was that of someone declining an invitation to dinner. The Vorthak admiral could not believe what he was hearing. This human female was actually refusing his generous offer of servitude and suggesting that he withdraw his fleet. The sheer audacity was beyond anything he had encountered in 60 years of military service. These creatures needed to be taught a harsh lesson about the realities of power. Kethmore ordered his fleet to advance on the human orbital installations and begin systematic destruction of their infrastructure. He would start with their largest space stations and work his way down to the smallest outposts. The lesson would be thorough and devastating, ensuring that any survivors understood the price of defying the collective. The first sign that something was wrong came when the Vorthak long-range sensors detected massive energy buildups throughout the human system. Installations that had appeared to be civilian facilities suddenly showed the signatures of military-grade fusion reactors and weapon systems. The numbers were impossible to believe. Admiral Stone gave the order that humanity had been preparing for since their first ventures into deep space. Every hidden weapon in the Sol system came online simultaneously. Orbital platforms revealed their true nature as the disguised hull plating retracted to expose massive gun batteries. Civilian ships dropped their false cargo pods to unveil missile launchers and particle beam arrays. The Vorthak fleet found themselves facing not a primitive civilization with minimal defenses, but the most sophisticated military trap ever constructed. Every approach vector was covered by overlapping fields of fire from weapons they had never seen before. Their own formations, perfect for intimidating helpless aliens, were completely wrong for fighting a real military force. Captain Morrison led his Q-ship squadron in the opening attack, striking at the alien fleet's rear guard while they were still trying to understand what was happening. The Dakota and its sister ships emerged from behind a massive asteroid where they had been hiding, their weapons already locked onto Vorthak targets. The human railguns fired first, sending streams of hypersonic projectiles across space faster than the alien sensors could track. Vorthak shields, designed to stop energy weapons and conventional missiles, offered no protection against solid-shot traveling at relativistic speeds. 3 enemy destroyers died in the first salvo. Captain Barnes brought her squadron around Neptune, in a flanking maneuver that caught the Vorthak completely by surprise. The Oregon's gravitational drive allowed impossible course changes that confused alien targeting computers. Her ships danced through space like fighters while unleashing the firepower of battleships. High Admiral Kethmore watched his perfect formation disintegrate under attacks from directions he had not even considered possible. Human weapons were tearing through his shields as if they did not exist. Their ships moved with speed and agility that violated everything he knew about space combat. This was not how wars were supposed to be fought. The Sol defense grid opened fire with coordinated precision that represented decades of planning and preparation. Weapon platforms throughout the system engaged designated targets with mathematical accuracy. The alien fleet found themselves caught in a crossfire from every direction, unable to concentrate their return fire effectively. Kethmore's flagship came under direct attack from the Constitution, which had revealed itself as a fortress, rather than a space station. Admiral Stone's vessel mounted weapons that the Vorthak had never imagined possible. Gravitational pulse cannons warped space itself around their targets. Particle beam arrays delivered focused destruction across impossible distances. The battle for Sol became a demonstration of human military superiority that shocked even Earth's own commanders. Weapon systems that had been theoretical just years before performed flawlessly in actual combat. Tactical coordination that had been practiced in simulations worked perfectly against real enemies. The Vorthak tried to adapt their tactics to deal with human capabilities, but they were fighting a completely different kind of war than anything in their experience. Their enemies used deception and misdirection instead of brute force. Human ships appeared where sensors said nothing existed and vanished when direct fire should have destroyed them. One by one, the ships of the mighty Vorthak invasion fleet were reduced to wreckage drifting through the outer solar system. Admiral Kethmore realized that his entire understanding of warfare had been wrong. These humans fought like no species he had ever encountered, and their technology was decades ahead of anything the collective possessed. High Admiral Kethmore's journey back to Vorthak Prime was the longest and most humiliating experience of his military career. His damaged flagship limped through hyperspace while emergency life support systems struggled to keep the surviving crew alive. Of the 50 magnificent warships that had departed for human space, only his crippled vessel remained to tell the tale of their complete destruction. The collective high command initially refused to believe Kethmore's report. The idea that their greatest fleet had been annihilated by primitive humans seemed impossible to accept. Some officers accused the admiral of cowardice or even treason. Others suggested that he had suffered mental breakdown from the stress of command and was hallucinating the entire encounter. The truth became undeniable when Kethmore provided detailed recordings of the battle. The footage showed human ships performing maneuvers that violated known physics and weapons that cut through Vorthak defenses like they were made of tissue paper. Most shocking of all was the revelation that the humans had been hiding their true capabilities behind elaborate deceptions. Admiral Catherine Stone wasted no time in capitalizing on humanity's decisive victory. Within hours of the battle's end, she had authorized the next phase of Earth's response to Vorthak aggression. The surviving alien databases captured during the fighting had provided complete intelligence about collective territory, military, installations, and industrial centers. Captain Morrison found himself promoted to Commodore and given command of humanity's first deep space strike force. His flagship was no longer the disguised cargo hauler Dakota, but the UES Retribution, a purpose-built warship that represented the pinnacle of human military technology. The vessel was designed specifically for operations in alien space. Captain Barnes received her own promotion to Admiral in command of the 2nd Battle Group. Her flagship Oregon had been refitted with the latest weapon systems and assigned a full squadron of escort vessels. The lessons learned from fighting the Vorthak had been incorporated into new ship designs and tactical doctrines. The human fleet that prepared to enter Vorthak space was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Where other species built ships for conquest and intimidation, humans had designed theirs for exploration and discovery. When forced to fight, however, these vessels proved capable of devastating efficiency that shocked even their own creators. Dr. Henry Chen's xenobiology department had been analyzing captured Vorthak technology and biological samples for weeks. His findings painted a grim picture of a species that had been genetically modified for aggression over thousands of years. The collective's entire society was built on conquest and could not exist without constant expansion and warfare. Chen's report recommended that humanity take immediate action to prevent the Vorthak from rebuilding their military forces. The aliens would never accept defeat and would continue attacking until one species or the other was completely eliminated. The only way to ensure human survival was to dismantle the collective's ability to wage war. Commodore Morrison's strike. Force departed Earth with specific orders to target Vorthak military installations and industrial centers. The fleet would avoid civilian populations whenever possible, but would show no mercy to military targets. Humanity had tried peaceful contact and been met with unprovoked aggression. The first Vorthak system to encounter human forces was Thek's-Kar Prime, a heavily fortified military staging area that served as a forward base for collective expansion operations. The system's commanders received confused reports of unknown vessels approaching, but assumed they were delayed Vorthak ships returning from some forgotten mission. Base Commander Vexthar watched the approaching fleet with growing confusion. The ships did not match any known collective designs and were not responding to standard identification codes. When he finally realized these were alien vessels, it was far too late to mount any effective defense. Morrison's fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation and immediately began jamming all Vorthak communications. The alien base found itself isolated and helpless as human ships took position around their orbital installations. The Commodore opened a communication channel and delivered humanity's ultimatum. The message was simple and direct. Vexthar had exactly 10 minutes to order the complete surrender of all military forces in the system. Any resistance would result in the immediate destruction of every Vorthak installation. Civilian facilities would be spared, but all military assets would be eliminated without mercy. Base Commander Vexthar had spent his entire career following collective doctrine that viewed surrender as the ultimate dishonor. No Vorthak officer had ever willingly laid down their weapons before an enemy. The very concept was alien to their warrior culture and genetic programming for aggression. Vexthar chose to fight, ordering his ships and orbital platforms to engage the human fleet. It was exactly the response that Morrison had expected and prepared for. The brief battle that followed lasted only 14 minutes and ended with the complete annihilation of every Vorthak military asset in the system. News of the attack spread through collective space, like wildfire carried by the few civilian ships that had witnessed the battle. For the first time in their history, the Vorthak faced an enemy that was not only capable of defeating them, but was actively hunting them down. Panic began to spread through their empire. Admiral Barnes led the second battle group in a series of lightning raids against Vorthak supply depots and shipyards. Her forces struck without warning and vanished before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Each attack further degraded the collective's ability to rebuild their shattered military forces. The psychological impact of these raids was even greater than their material damage. Vorthak commanders who had never known defeat suddenly found themselves helpless against an enemy they could neither predict nor counter. Morale collapsed throughout the collective military as word spread of humanity's unstoppable advance. Morrison's fleet continued its systematic destruction of Vorthak military installations, moving from system to system with relentless efficiency. The aliens tried to adapt their tactics and technology to counter human capabilities, but they were always one step behind. Every countermeasure they developed was quickly overcome by superior human innovation. The liberation of alien species, enslaved by the collective, became an unexpected consequence of humanity's campaign. Dozens of worlds that had suffered under Vorthak rule for centuries suddenly found themselves free as their oppressors fled or were destroyed. Many of these species offered to join humanity's alliance against their former masters. The final battle took place in the Vorthak home system, around the heavily defended world of Vorthak Prime itself. The planet was protected by massive orbital fortresses and hundreds of defensive platforms that had been built over 3 centuries of conquest. It should have been impregnable against any conceivable attack. Morrison approached the collective homeworld with his entire combined fleet, now grown to include vessels from a dozen liberated species. The force that surrounded Vorthak Prime represented the largest military alliance in galactic history, united by their shared desire to end the collective's reign of terror forever. The defense of their homeworld was the Vorthak's last stand, led by the few remaining High Admirals who had survived humanity's campaign. They threw everything they had against the approaching fleet, determined to make the aliens pay dearly for every meter of space they advanced. The battle raged for 3 days across the entire star system. Vorthak defenders fought with desperate courage, knowing that defeat meant the end of their civilization. But courage alone could not overcome the technological and tactical superiority that humanity had demonstrated throughout the war. One by one, the mighty fortresses that had protected Vorthak Prime for centuries were reduced to drifting wreckage. The orbital shipyards that had built the collective's war fleets were systematically destroyed. The communication networks that had coordinated their empire fell silent under human electronic warfare. The last High Admiral of the collective died on the bridge of his flagship as Morrison's forces closed in on the planet itself. His final transmission was a warning to any Vorthak who might survive. The humans were not conquerors seeking glory or territory, but liberators who would accept nothing less than the complete dismantling of the collective's military machine. Commodore Morrison stood on the bridge of the Retribution as it took orbit around the former collective capital. The planet below showed signs of massive industrial cities and military installations that had been built through 3 centuries of conquest and oppression. Soon, these would be converted to peaceful purposes or dismantled entirely. Admiral Stone arrived from Earth aboard her flagship to oversee the transition of Vorthak Prime from military dictatorship to supervised reconstruction. The planet's population would be re-educated and their aggressive tendencies gradually bred out through careful genetic therapy. It would take generations, but the Vorthak could eventually become a peaceful species. The war that had begun with the attack on a single cargo ship was finally over. Humanity had taken its place among the stars not as conquerors seeking territory, but as liberators who refused to tolerate aggression against the innocent. The galaxy was a very different place than it had been just